Part 5. Grandfather Gillenormand had, at this period, fully completed his 91st year. He still lived with Mademoiselle Gillenormand, Rue de Fille du Calvaire, number 6, in that old house which belonged to him. He was, as we remember, one of those antique old men who await death still erect, whom age loads without making them stoop, and whom grief itself does not bend. Still, for some time his daughter had said, "My father is failing." He no longer beat his servants. He struck his cane with less animation on the landing of the stairs, when Basque was slow in opening the door. The Revolution of July had hardly exasperated him for 6 months. The fact is that the old man was filled with dejection. He did not bend, he did not yield. That was no more a part of his physical than of his moral nature. But he felt himself interiorly failing. 4 years had been waiting for Marius with his foot down, that is just the word, in the conviction that the naughty little scapegrace would ring at his door some day or another. Now he had come, in certain gloomy hours, to say to himself that even if Marius should delay but a little longer. It was not death that was insupportable to him. It was the idea that perhaps he should never see Marius again. Never see Marius again. That had not, even for an instant, entered into his thought until this day. Now this idea began to appear to him, and it chilled him. Absence, as always, happens when feelings are natural and true. Had only increased their grandfather's love for his ungrateful child, who had gone away like that. It is on December nights, with the thermometer at 0, that we think most of the sun. Monsieur Gillenormand was, or thought himself in any event, incapable of taking a step, he the grandfather, towards his grandson.
"I would die first,"
said he. He acknowledged no fault on his part, but he thought of Marius only with a deep tenderness, and the mute despair of an old good man who is going away into the darkness. He was beginning to lose his teeth, which added to his sadness. Once, as he was sitting, his knees pressed together, and his eyes almost closed, in a posture of dejection, his daughter ventured to say to him, "Father, are you still so angry with him?" She stopped, not daring to go further.
"With whom?"
asked he. "With that poor Marius." He raised his old head, laid his thin and wrinkled fist upon the table, and cried in his most irritated and quivering tone,
"Poor Marius, you say? That gentleman is a rascal, a worthless knave, a little ungrateful vanity, with no heart, no soul, a proud, a wicked man."
and he turned away that his daughter might not see the tears that he had in his eyes. 3 days later, after a silence which had lasted for 4 hours, he said to his daughter snappishly,
"I have had the honor to beg Mademoiselle Gillenormand never to speak to me of him."
One morning, it was the 4th of June, which did not prevent Monsieur Gillenormand from having a blazing fire in his fireplace. He had said a good night to his daughter, who was sewing in the adjoining room. He was alone in his room, with the rural scenery, his feet upon the andirons, half enveloped in his vast coromandel screen with 9 folds, leaning upon his table, on which 2 candles were burning under a green shade, buried in his tapestried armchair, a book in his hand, but not reading. Monsieur Gillenormand thought of Marius lovingly and bitterly, and as usual the bitterness predominated. An increase of tenderness always ended by boiling over and turning into indignation. He was at that point where we seek to adopt a course and to accept what rends us. But his whole nature revolted. His old paternity could not consent to it.
"What?"
said he. This was his sorrowful refrain.
"He will not come back."
His bald head had fallen upon his breast, and he was vaguely fixing a lamentable and irritated look upon the embers of his hearth. In the deepest of this reverie, his old domestic, Basque, came in and asked, "Can monsieur receive Monsieur Marius?" The old man straightened up, pallid, and like a corpse which rises under a galvanic shock. All his blood had flown back to his heart. He faltered.
"Monsieur Marius, what?"
"I don't know," answered Basque, intimidated and thrown out of countenance by his master's appearance. "I have not seen him. Nicolette told me. There's a young man here. Say it is Monsieur Marius." Monsieur Gillenormand stammered out in a whisper,
"Show him in."
and he remained in the same attitude, his head shaking, his eyes fixed on the door. It opened. A young man entered. It was Marius. Marius stopped at the door, as if waiting to be asked to come in. His almost wretched dress was not perceived in the obscurity produced by the green shade. Only his face, calm and grave, but strangely sad, could be distinguished. Monsieur Gillenormand, as if congested with astonishment and joy, sat for some moments without seeing anything but a light, as when one is in presence of an apparition. He was almost fainting. He perceived Marius through a blinding haze. It was indeed he. It was indeed Marius. At last, after 4 years, he seized him, so to speak, all over at a glance. He thought him beautiful, noble, striking, adult, a complete man, with graceful attitude and pleasing air. He would gladly have opened his arms, called him, rushed upon him. His heart melted in rapture. Affectionate words welled and overflowed in his breast. Indeed, all his tenderness started up and came to his lips. And through the contrast which was the groundwork of his nature, there came forth a harsh word. He said abruptly,
"What is it you come here for?"
Marius answered with embarrassment, Monsieur. Monsieur Gillenormand would have had Marius throw himself into his arms. He was displeased with Marius and with himself. He felt that he was rough and that Marius was cold. It was to the good man an insupportable and irritating anguish to feel himself so tender and so much in tears within, while he could only be harsh without. The bitterness returned. He interrupted Marius in a sharp tone.
"Then what do you come for?"
This then signified, if you do not come to embrace me. Marius looked at his grandfather, whose pallor had changed to marble. Monsieur, the old man continued in a stern voice,
"Do you come to ask my pardon? Have you seen your fault?"
he thought to put Marius on the track, and that the child was going to bend. Marius shuddered. It was the disavowal of his father which was asked of him. He cast down his eyes and answered, No, monsieur.
"And then?"
exclaimed the old man impetuously, with a grief which was bitter and full of anger.
"What do you want with me?"
Marius clasped his hands, took a step, and said in a feeble and trembling voice, Monsieur, have pity on me. This word moved Monsieur Gillenormand. Spoken sooner, it would have softened him, but it came too late. The grandfather arose. He supported himself upon his cane with both hands. His lips were white, his forehead quivered, but his tall stature commanded the stooping Marius.
"Pity on you, monsieur? The youth asks pity from the old man of 91? Zounds! Moliere forgot this. If that is the way you jest at the Palais, monsieur lawyer, I offer you my sincere compliments. You are funny fellows."
And the octogenarian resumed in an angry and stern voice.
"Come now, what do you want of me?"
Monsieur, said Marius, I know that my presence is displeasing to you, but I come only to ask one thing of you, and then I will go away immediately.
"You are a fool,"
said the old man.
"Who tells you to go away?"
Monsieur, said Marius, with the look of a man who feels that he is about to fall into abyss, I come to ask your permission to marry. Monsieur Gillenormand rang. Basque half opened his door.
Send my daughter in."
A second later the door opened again. Mademoiselle Gillenormand did not come in, but showed herself. Marius was standing, mute, his arms hanging down, with the look of a criminal. Monsieur Gillenormand was coming and going up and down the room. He turned toward his daughter and said to her,
"Nothing. It is Monsieur Marius. Bid him good evening. Monsieur and Mrs. to marry. That is all. Go."
The crisp, harsh tones of the old man's voice announced a strange fullness of feeling. The aunt looked at Marius with a bewildered air, appeared hardly to recognize him, allowed neither a motion nor a syllable to escape her, and disappeared at a breath from her father, quicker than a dry leaf before a hurricane. Meanwhile, Grandfather Gillenormand had returned and stood with his back to the fireplace.
"You marry? At 21? You have arranged that? So, you want to marry? Whom? Can the question be asked without indiscretion?"
He stopped, and before Marius had time to answer, he added violently,
"Come now. You have a business? Your fortune made? How much do you earn at your lawyer's trade?"
Nothing, said Marius, with a firmness and resolution which were almost savage.
"Nothing? You have nothing to live on but the 1,200 livres which I send you?"
Marius made no answer. Monsieur Gillenormand continued.
"Then I understand the girl is rich."
As I am.
"What? No dowry?"
No.
"Some expectations?"
I believe not.
"With nothing to her back, and what is the father?"
I don't know.
"What is her name?"
Mademoiselle Fauchelevent.
"Fauchelevent what?"
Fauchelevent,
Tch!
said the old man. Monsieur, exclaimed Marius. Monsieur Gillenormand interrupted him with the tone of a man who is talking to himself.
"That is it. 21. No business. 1,200 livres a year. Madame the Baroness Pontmercy will go to the market to buy 2 sous worth of parsley."
Monsieur, said Marius, in the desperation of the last vanishing hope, I supplicate you, I conjure you, in the name of heaven, with clasped hands, monsieur, I throw myself at your feet. Allow me to marry her. The old man burst into a shrill, dreary laugh, through which he coughed and spoke.
You said to yourself, the devil! I will go and find that old Whig, that silly dolt. I will say to him, Old idiot, you are too happy to see me. I desire to marry. I desire to espouse Mademoiselle no matter whom. Daughter of Monsieur no matter what. I have no shoes. She has no chemise. All right. I desire to throw to the dogs my career, my future, my youth, my life. I desire to make a plunge into misery with a wife at my neck. That is my idea. You must consent to it. And the old fossil will consent. Go, my boy, as you like. Tie your stone to yourself. Expose your pouce lavon, your coupe lavon. Never, monsieur, never.
Father!
Never.
At the tone in which this never was pronounced, Marius lost all hope. He walked the room with slow steps, his head bowed down, tottering, more like a man who is dying than one who is going away. Monsieur Gillenormand followed him with his eyes, and at the moment the door opened and Marius was going out, he took 4 steps with the senile vivacity of impetuous and self-willed old men, seized Marius by the collar, drew him back forcibly into the room, threw him into an armchair, and said to him,
Tell me about it.
it was that single word, father, dropped by Marius, which had caused this revolution. Marius looked at him in bewilderment. The changing countenance of Monsieur Gillenormand expressed nothing now but a rough and ineffable good nature. The guardian had given place to the grandfather.
Come, let us see, speak. Tell me about your love scrapes. Jabber, tell me all. Lord, how foolish these young folks are.
Father, resumed Marius. The old man's face shone with an inexplicable radiance.
Yes, that is it. Call me father, and you shall see.
There was now something so kind, so sweet, so open, so paternal in this abruptness, that Marius, in this sudden passage from discouragement to hope, was, as it were, intoxicated, stupefied. He was sitting near the table. The light of the candle made the wretchedness of his dress apparent, and the grandfather gazed at it in astonishment. Well, father, said Marius.
Come now,
Interrupted Monsieur Gillenormand.
then you really haven't a sou. You are dressed like a robber.
He fumbled in a drawer and took out a purse, which he laid upon the table.
Here, there's 100 louis. Buy yourself a hat.
Father, pursued Marius, my good father, if you knew I love her, you don't realize it. The first time that I saw her was at the Luxembourg. She came there, and in the beginning I did not pay much attention to her. And then, I do not know how it came about, I fell in love with her. Oh, how wretched this has made me. Now I see her every day, at her own house. Her father does not know it. Only think that they are going away. We see each other in the garden in the evening. Her father wants to take her to England. Then I said to myself, I will go and see my grandfather and tell him about it. I should go crazy in the first place. I should die. I should make myself sick. I should throw myself into the river. I must marry her, because I should go crazy. Now that is the whole truth. I do not believe that I've forgotten anything. Grandfather Gillenormand, radiant with joy, had sat down by Marius' side. While listening to him and enjoying the sound of his voice, he enjoyed at the same time a long pinch of snuff.
Marius, I think it is very well for a young man like you to be in love. It belongs to your age. Pretty women are pretty women, the devil. There's no objection to that. As to the little girl, she receives you unknown to papa. That is all right. I've had adventures like that myself, more than one. Do you know how we do? We don't take the thing ferociously. We don't rush into the tragic. We don't conclude with marriage, and with Monsieur the Mayor and his scarf. We are together a shrewd fellow. We have good sense. Slip over it. Mortals don't marry. We come and find grandfather, who is a good man at heart, and who almost always has a few rolls of louis in an old drawer, and we say to him, Grandfather, that's how it is. And grandfather says, that's all natural. Youth must fare, and old age must wear. I have been young. You will be old. Go on, my boy. You will repay this to your grandson. There are 200 pistoles. Amuse yourself roundly. Nothing better. That is the way the thing should be done. We don't marry, but that doesn't hinder. You understand me?
Marius, petrified, and unable to articulate a word, shook his head. The good man burst into a laugh, winked his old eye, gave him a tap on the knee, looked straight into his eyes with a significant and sparkling expression, and said to him with the most amorous shrug of the shoulders,
Stupid! Make her your mistress.
Marius turned pale. He had understood nothing of all that his grandfather had been saying. The good man was wondering, but this wondering had terminated in a word which Marius did understand, and which was a deadly insult to Cosette. The phrase, make her your mistress, entered the heart of the chaste young man like a sword. He rose, picked up his hat which was on the floor, and walked toward the door with a firm and assured step. There he turned, bowed profoundly before his grandfather, raised his head again and said, 5 years ago, you outraged my father. Today you have outraged my wife. I ask nothing more of you, monsieur. Adieu. Grandfather Gillenormand, astounded, opened his mouth, stretched out his arms, attempted to rise, but before he could utter a word, the door closed and Marius had disappeared. The old man was for a few moments motionless, and as it were thunderstruck, unable to speak or breathe, as if a hand was clutching his throat. At last he tore himself from his chair, ran to the door as fast as a man who is 91 can run, opened it and cried,
Help! Help!
His daughter appeared, then the servants. He continued with a pitiful rattle in his voice,
Run after him! Catch him! What have I done to him? He is mad. He's going away. Oh my God! Oh my God! This time he will not come back.
He went to the window, which looked upon the street, opened it with his tremulous old hands, hung more than half his body outside while Basque and Nicolette held him from behind, and cried,
Marius! 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 Marius!
But Marius was already out of hearing, and was at that very moment turning the corner of the Rue Saint Louis. The octogenarian carried his hands to his temples 2 or 3 times, with an expression of anguish, drew back tottering, and sank into an armchair, pulseless, voiceless, tearless, shaking his head and moving his lips with a stupid air, having now nothing in his eyes or in his heart but something deep and mournful, which resembled night.